It's a topic that connects us all, whether we are parents or not. All of you here are someone's children. All of you here will have some thoughts, some beliefs about family life. And for me, I am mum to two wonderful, now adult children. And I can honestly say it's probably the biggest role I'll ever play in my life, being a parent. And as a parenting coach, I'm a bit nervous admitting this, but I have a huge confession to make. And that confession is, I haven't always enjoyed my time as being a mum. I have to be really honest with you. In the early days, I found it exhausting, bewildering, messy, complicated. I frequently got things wrong. I made so many mistakes, and I kind of didn't recognize myself when my children just didn't listen to me. And I ended up screaming like a banshee when they just wouldn't follow my instructions. And I don't know if your parents there, whether you recognize how frustrating it is when your children don't listen to you. This is a picture of my son, Sam, as a baby. And 23 years ago, when I held him in my arms, I never, ever imagined that one day I would be shouting at his beautiful little face. But somehow I just didn't recognize myself, and I turned into a screaming banshee. So I invite you to be really honest with me. And I'd love you to put your hands up if, as a child, your parents ever did this to you. Did they ever nag you? Yeah. Repeat instructions over and over again. Yeah. Remind you to get the homework done. Tell you off for having the floor drobe on your bedroom floor. Yeah. I did all of these things, and I cajoled. And did your parents ever bribe you, threaten, and perhaps even punish? I did all of these things. I just didn't know how to get the best out of my children. I didn't understand their needs. I didn't understand my son's temperament. I think once I even threatened to cancel Christmas. I know that was harsh. I was going to ban my children from the internet forever. And I think once I just wanted to ground my son till he was 24. I found it really, really exhausting. And I didn't understand my son's inborn temperament, and it took us a long time to work out that he was very sensitive, extremely impulsive, which means there was no self-control button, and incredibly intense in his emotions. And very, very quickly, he became labeled as the naughty one. And it started early. At nursery school, I would be met at the nursery gate, and it would always be, Mrs. Halligan, we have not had a good day. At age 3.5, my son would be given a report card of he's not listening, he can't sit still, he's aggressive with the other children. And so very, very quickly, he was almost written off and labeled as the naughty one. It was an emotional roller coaster ride with many what I call low parenting moments, and I call those my LPMs, and I've had lots of them. And one particular LPM I'd love to share with you is many years ago, and I remember this incident as if it was yesterday. And this LPM was on a London train on a cold, dark winter's night. And Sam and I were rushing from our timeout behavioral center, rushing home, and we boarded this train, and it was incredibly busy. It was deeply unpleasant, very crowded, but we were lucky enough to grab a couple of seats. And as we sat down, I could see that all the ingredients there were for a perfect storm. Sam was cold, he was hungry, he was tired, and everyone around on the train was just desperate to get home, everyone more tetchy than the other, just wanting to get home. And Sam suddenly in the seat starts kicking. He starts kicking his leg. And I say to Sam, stop it. And there's a lady standing there, and he's kicking his leg against her. Stop it, Sam, don't do that. I asked him several times, and he continued to do it. And it looked for all intents and purposes that I was completely out of control, which I was, and that my son was dysfunctional. I pleaded with him. I nagged him. I bribed him. I threatened him. I said, stop doing that to this lady. And quite naturally, the lady standing there was getting more and more upset. Her tuts and her huffs, and she was visibly upset, and suddenly she turns to me and she says this: "What your son needs is a darn good smack. He needs discipline." I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt so embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. And suddenly on this packed London train, whereas so much as making eye contact with another passenger is frowned upon, I find myself standing up and I'm making a speech to everyone. And I say to them, I'm dealing with a child on the autistic spectrum. I need your support, not your judgment, as my son is differently wired. He's not being a problem, he's having a problem. But the last thing in the world I'm going to do is smack my child for having a problem. Now, will someone just help me leave the carriage at the next station? Well, you can imagine. The silence was excruciating. No one knew where to look or where to put themselves. And then suddenly, this lovely passenger, I think it must have been a father, just said, "Yeah, will you leave that poor lady alone? She's doing the best job she can." And then suddenly, the whole carriage descends into a heated argument about how should we discipline children, how little we know about autistic spectrum, was I doing it right or wrong, and is smacking an effective form of discipline? You see, everyone on that carriage was judging me and my son based on his behavior. He was labeled permanently silly for locking himself in a cupboard at school for 5 hours, stupid for at one school setting the fire alarm off. He was labeled naughty at another school for letting the farmyard animals out. Sam had this romantic notion at this school where there was a lovely farmyard of animals, some chickens and some hens. I think there was a goat and a sheep. And Sam had this idea, no, these guys should be living back on Wimbledon Common. So he let them out. It was, he had good intentions, but they didn't go to Wimbledon Common. They migrated down to the busiest arterial road in London, the A3. And so Sam, aged 5.5, was responsible for causing traffic chaos. There is a Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh, and he says, when you plant a lettuce, if the lettuce doesn't grow, you don't blame the lettuce. You don't shout at the lettuce, say what a naughty lettuce, what a stupid lettuce. You look at the conditions the lettuce is in. Does it need more water? Does it need less sun? Or does it need a different fertilizer? But you don't shout or blame the lettuce. But our son was permanently blamed, to such an extent that by the age of 7, he had been excluded from 3 schools in so many years. And he was written off by those who should have cared for him. 3 school expulsions in 3 years. We just didn't know which way to turn. And I'll never forget a friend calling me who worked at the local education authority. And she said, "Elaine, is everything all right at home?" She said, "I've just seen Sam's name is on the list of children missing from education." How had it come to this? My husband and I sought professional advice, and we were left with conflicting professional opinions and so many diagnoses, it left Sam as the alphabet kid. He was diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance, oppositional defiance disorder. We didn't know who to trust or believe. Our traditional education system here was desperately trying to take our beautiful circle and shove it into a square, and it just wasn't working. And every day at school was deepening the damage by making Sam more stressed and more anxious. But I just sensed that actually Sam was a good person. I sensed he was misunderstood, and I sensed there was something there that we had to find, and he was like a rock covered in mud. But if we could just wipe back the mud, I sensed that we would find perhaps a sparkling diamond. So what did we do? Well, we didn't understand Sam, we didn't understand his behavior, we didn't understand his temperament, so we sought help. And I can honestly say that was the best thing we could have done. The positive parenting support we got as a family, it transformed our lives, it transformed our son's life, and it gave me a completely new career as a parenting coach. And I haven't looked back since. And when we started to realize that Sam's main issue was severe dyslexia, then the magic started to happen because we started to have more empathy and more understanding with where the behavior was coming from. You see, all behavior is a form of communication. All behavior has a cause. So what did my husband and I do? We started to speak to Sam differently. We started to notice that the small steps of improvement he made, the progress, the effort, the attitude, as opposed to the end result, and his self-esteem grew. We started to listen and validate all those feelings of anxiety, frustration, anger, and we gave him other ways to deal with his emotions. In other words, we made him a more emotionally intelligent. And we also gave him chores to do in the house. We started to build up his independence and self-reliance to enable him to become a young man who could really think and act for himself. You see, when your sense of self-esteem is strong, only then can you start working with your strengths and accept those weaknesses without it lowering your self-worth. So Sam became a young man who really thrived with his creativity, his problem-solving strengths, his resilience, because of course he'd failed so much in his life. And the proudest day for us as parents, for Tony and I, was when Sam finished his formal education as head boy. That's him standing there in bright yellow trousers. I have to ask you, gentlemen, how many of you would wear bright yellow trousers? But here was a young man truly comfortable in his own skin. He left school, went into the workplace, and suddenly with his skills of problem solving and creativity, he became an adventurer, and he did something truly mad called the Mongol Rally. In 2015, he drove from London to Mongolia, as you do. 18,000 kilometers across Europe, the Caspian Sea, through deserts, all in a 1.2-liter Skoda car. My anxiety levels went through the roof. And when he came back, I knew life was never going to be the same again. And the following year, he did another, what I call death-defying adventure. This time, something called the Rickshaw Run. I don't know whether you've heard of it. It's mad. You have to be mad to do it. And you drive the equivalent of an 8-horsepower lawnmower from North India all the way down to Kochi in Kerala. And you do it in a tuk-tuk. The only difference this time is that little tuk-tuk at the end, the orange one, with the New Zealand and the Scottish flag, held also his sister, Izzy, Sam's sister, Izzy, and also me. That little face in the back was me. And I can honestly tell you my hip flexors have not recovered since. It's not easy pushing yourself into a rickshaw. Like another well-known dyslexic, Sam today is an entrepreneur. And he is in his most joyful zone, working to his strengths. He's at his happiest when he is working on his classic car business, buying and selling Range Rovers and Land Rovers. So what's the moral of this story? Well, if you are sitting as a parent with a difficult child, let me tell you, there is always hope in the face of adversity. And if you perhaps have a child who's different or neurodiverse, biology is not destiny. But first, we need to stop this blame game. And the next time you see a parent really struggling with a child, just stop. Press a pause button, reframe, and think just perhaps this child is not being a problem, but maybe they are having a problem. Why? Because all behavior is a form of communication. Thank you.